Good morning, and welcome to our Social Justice Literacy Seminar for Colorado Secondary School Teachers, Intersectional Principles and Practices for Equitable Learning. We are honored today to have as our keynote speaker, Dr. Maria Gabriel. She will assist us in starting our seminar to focus on empowering secondary teachers to examine their pedagogical approaches and classroom dynamics towards a focus on equitable teaching practices. Dr. Gabriel has worked as a PK through 12 public educator in Colorado since 1997. She has direct experience with students in the classroom and with the school administration. She's devoted her career as an educator to increasing access and opportunity for culturally, linguistically, and racially diverse students. Her direct support for culturally sustaining family engagement, community-based educational research, and equity leadership is well known in Northern Colorado. She has served on several local and national boards that have focused on gender and racial equity, multicultural education, and inclusive community outreach. I was honored to serve with Dr. Gabriel on the Northern Colorado Multicultural Corporation Board in Fort Collins, Colorado. This board was made up of 7 different entities from the city: Colorado State University, Poudre School District, Poudre Valley Hospital, and several different corporations that came together to work as a unit to promote multicultural awareness, education, and learning in Northern Colorado. We are so honored to have Dr. Gabriel with us. She has a passion for teaching, for learning, a passion and commitment for equitable justice. Let us now hear from Dr. Maria Gabriel.
I'm so happy to be here. I titled this presentation as "This is Our Moment" for a variety of reasons. But I just can't tell you how excited I am to know that you all are committed in the summertime to this conversation about social justice literacy in education. And I just, when I'm thinking about the title, I just can't articulate more than I am with this title slide, how important this is, and that this is our time to recommit if we've been committed in the past, and to commit, if we haven't been committed in the past, to addressing the needs of the students that are in front of us. So I'm just going to start with a little bit. I think you did some poetry reading earlier. Just share with you a little bit out of this particular text, so you know a little bit about who I am and where we're headed. I was born in South America and raised in Colorado in a conservative white community where I attended all white schools. By the time I reached junior high, I'd experienced racial microaggressions and outright bias, prejudice, and discrimination. These experiences continued throughout high school and into college, where I was consistently asked by professors to represent the Latino perspective. I wish that my teachers and professors had held the dispositions for social justice that they could have used to address racial incidents when they occurred. I wanted that my teachers to demonstrate a disposition for community through which they would leverage my differences as assets rather than making me feel alienated from my cultural norms. If my teachers would have had a disposition for praxis, including a willingness to critically examine their own identities, they may have recognized how they were prioritizing their own cultural perspectives over mine, leaving me with a low sense of belonging in my educational experience. Such multicultural teachers were few and far between in my education, yet I persevered in hopes of creating a more equitable and just education for future generations of diverse youth, as Dr. Vigil stated in the opening. So I just wanted to start out with that, just a little bit of personal perspective, and to share with you where we're headed in this time together. I know I have about an hour, but I also understand we want to have some time to ask questions. I want this to be an opportunity for you to engage. And so really want to just share with you the lens through which I've been doing this work for 25 years as a public educator, committed to educational equity and social justice. Really just give you a framework, a theoretical framework as an offering to you today. I know you're going to be learning some really amazing things over the next 5 days. And so critical consciousness will be perhaps just one that you might add to your toolkit, thinking about the work from Gloria Ladson-Billings on culturally relevant pedagogy and the notion of critical consciousness. I also want to make an offer that we acknowledge the socio-cultural and socio-political context of teaching and learning, that our students, our educators, our families, our staff are in the midst of, and as well as offer opportunities for reflection. And so I want this to be somewhat engaging for you also, so that you get an opportunity to not just hear, but also to learn, to reflect, and to think about what does that mean for your next steps. And as you engage in this, is this really important training. And then also, I want to give you a chance to practice one of the ways in which critical consciousness shows up is questioning, right? And so just because I say it doesn't mean that you perhaps will agree with it. And so I want to make time for questions, but also for you to have that questioning time for yourself. So it's important to me when I think about critical consciousness and the work of Gloria Ladson-Billings. Part of that is really engaging in the idea of what's true for me. Like, who am I? How do I show up in the world is my all-time favorite question. And so sharing that helps us build our understanding of our own cultural background, our own diversity story. I think part of where you're heading even this morning, is to do some of that personal examination. And so I just want to share with you so that you understand where my perspective is coming from. I was born in Ecuador in South America, and I was born as an identical twin. It's me and my twin sister here. Um, those things are part of who I am, where I'm from. It forms my racial identity, but also has helped form my what's known as a collective identity, where we operate in schools that run on individualistic, often very competitive types of systems. I grew up as a we. I spoke, I thought, I dreamt as we. It really has been a fascinating life experience to not ever see myself as an individual, but always be in systems that demand individualism and reward individualism. This picture here to the right are my two daughters, both now teenagers, both in high school, both driving, one with a permit and one with a license. So just to give you a sense of my, where I'm at personally. But I share this picture because part of the experience that I've had also is, as a mother over the past 17 years, has been engaging in the world and understanding for my children, who look very different because of their multiracial, multi-ethnic backgrounds and color of skin and color of eyes that they have. I watched it play out not only in my own life experience and the experience of the students that I've served in Northern Colorado, but my own children in their education and the way they've been received and or rejected by their community based on color of skin, color of hair, color of eyes, right? And so I share that with you because that is just part of how I show up in the world, right? Those experiences and how what Dr. Vigil mentioned as my passion for this work is deeply rooted in where I was born, how I was raised, and how I'm raising young women to be social justice advocates. Another thing that I want to share with you is that part of my life has also been, I've had family in different parts of the world. And so I've had, since actually 1993, been in different parts of the world, mostly a lot of time in Spain, which has given me a different context from being in Ecuador, which from Mexico, from other parts where I've really gotten a chance to understand and grow and develop and learn about the differences around language and dialect and cultural norms, and that often people like myself, as marking the box for my race ethnicity, it's the first box that we all fill out. The first one is, are you Hispanic or Latino? And so many of you may know that often that becomes kind of that big grouping. And in fact, we are very, very diverse. And that language is also highly connected to culture. And lots of times schools, and in my own experience leading English language development, working with teachers who have felt that language is part of this stronghold, but not understood how culture is connected. And so a lot of this life experience and the opportunity to travel and see different places and experience and navigate the world and understand that there's different ways of knowing and doing are all cultural ways that we show up. And I think I just have that kind of passion to understand and try things out, because as a social justice advocate, I also believe it's not just about knowing the theoretical framework or even teaching it, but it's also about living it. And so that's a part of way I've engaged in the world, and have the opportunity to share that often with my own children. I've also taken the opportunity, as many of you are still continuing to think about what is my summer plans, because now we can talk about summer plans in summer 2021. What is my continued learning? And so one of the things that I've really tried to focus on in my life is going to museums and getting the opportunity to civil rights museums across the U.S. Going to the opportunity to go to the Holocaust Museum in Berlin and take my children here at the Berlin Wall, or be at the hiding place here at the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, places things that have helped develop my own critical consciousness about history and ensuring that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. And also having that personal opportunity to build my awareness and reflect and sit in it and sit in those difficult spaces and learn about how does that impact me and the way that I show up in the world as an educator. The other things that I talk about, I'm really open about in my work as a mother scholar, as an educator, as a public school district administrator, is that it's important to me to share my background related to a host of difficult experiences and things that I've faced. Talking about my own trauma background, I'm often very open about, because I have a lens, and my master's work was in school counseling. And I'm really passionate about the need to shift from old stereotypical processes and policies around positive behavior intervention supports to being more inclusive when we think about the ways we engage in like classroom management, being mindful of diverse aspects of culture, and the ways that our students are showing up to us. And so I've really been an advocate for transformative SEL, for example. And I think lots of times we hear from educators who engage us in conversations about trauma-informed practices or SEL, social emotional learning, who haven't had the lived experience. And so it's the same thing we see often where people engage in conversations about race or gender identity or sexual orientation. They're not members of the group who share that identity. And so I own that because it's part of my story. And I've done a lot of personal work around owning those parts of my story and knowing what it is to live in a world where sometimes all you can do is hold on, right? And so the other parts of who I am also, as I said, a mother, scholar, and educator. I've been an educator, as you heard, in Northern Colorado for 25 years, been in public school education system. I have started my work as an educator as a bilingual school secretary, and as a classified employee, was itinerant for a few years, working through multiple schools, and really got that sense of what staff do, what's culture and climate in a building, how do staff embrace or reject people of color who are adults, and just knowing how that trickles down to students and families. Live that and have experienced it and have tried to, again, just advocate for those changes within systems. I've also worked as a administrative professional technical person. That's my current thing. If you don't know what that means, it's like you're moving from classified to licensed to administrator. With that, I've also been grant funded. So I know what it is to think your job is running out of funding at the end of the year. For those of you who ever had that fun, it's highly stressful. In Colorado, if you don't know this, if you're a school district administrator, you're considered at will, which means you can be let go at any time. So that's a whole nother level of stress that people like myself have to manage our experiences around being triggered around abandonment, rejection, and loss. I'll just name it like that. I've also been a district administrator for many years now. I was trying to think, I think probably since 2001. district administrator leading equity and diversity work, and also a building assistant principal at a preschool through fifth grade Title I school there in Fort Collins. So all of that to say, all of this experience has helped to develop me as an individual, but also as an educator. It helps me answer that question about who am I and how do I show up in the world. I've also, as you can see here, I just took a picture of some books this morning of things that I've contributed to in terms of authoring and publishing and co-editing and things that I never thought I'd be able to do, but felt really important because that was really what led me to this work, was around acknowledging that when I was at CU Boulder for my bachelor's work, there was about 4 or 5% of the students who were of Hispanic and Latino background, and out of 25,000 students at the time. And I was volunteering at the time at the bilingual school just across the street from CU Boulder, University Hill Elementary. And then I went to work there as a bilingual school secretary. And it's a 50-50 dual language immersion model at the time. And so 50% of the students were Latino. And so I had this moment in my head of why is not anybody like making it through this pipeline, right? No, 50% of the students across the school are in elementary, and they're amazing, and they're bilingual, and getting great skills in Boulder Valley School District, et cetera. But as we know, there's a whole history around the reasons why some of our students get access and opportunity and some of them don't. And so that really led to the work that I do around engaging in these conversations, and um, built my passion around that too. So I wanted to share with you a little bit and we're going to walk through some different exercises to share with you my thinking and just kind of the framework around having a strong critical consciousness and how that can support your work in social justice literacy. This particular model is, let me move the pictures, I think, from Ladson Billings from 1995, her seminal article on culturally relevant pedagogy. And she talks about that there are these three components of, and one being academic achievement and student learning. I use this in some of my other trainings and teachings. And so this particular model I added in here. To me, it's not just about academic achievement. It's about our teachers creating exemplars and rubrics. Do students know where they're at and how to get there with their scores and reaching success? And that they're creating a sense of a love of learning. Having my own children in the system and surviving COVID-19, the pandemic and closures, and child having COVID-19, one of my children being quarantined because of close contact, missing 15 days of school in spring semester. Like I have a sense of what happens for some students when they don't have a love of learning. They are not connected to adults, all those kinds of things that matter for building academic success. The second component here is that she talks about, and this again in 1995, this is the early article. There's later articles that include teachers, not just students, but that students must develop a critical consciousness through which they challenge the status quo of the current social order. For me, it's really important to use, as a critical race theorist, to use stories to offer what's known as counter stories to what are the majoritarian narrative, meaning the stories that you might have heard about what's true for folks. You're going to hear me say a lot of things that are actually the counter story to that. One of those around this that I was just trying to think of some real relevant examples around education were to share with you today, was developing my own children's critical consciousness. And as an example, my younger daughter, when she went to middle school, I don't know how she found out about it, but I think it was through social media because she, has her phone and is connected to all kinds of things and people and platforms and apps. And she came to me one day in the summer, it was late in the summer, early August, and said, "Hey, the volleyball tryouts are today." And she was just starting in middle school. And I said, "Well, how would you know? How did you know?" She said, "Somebody, told me, and it's on the website." And I said, "I got on the website. I couldn't find anything about, volleyball. Like I was wondering if they're having open gyms or how it works in middle school. I didn't really know." And she said, "Yeah, no, the practice is tomorrow." So we get in the car the next day because I have a flexible job. I have a car that operates. I have, I can do this transportation thing in the middle of the day on a summer day. And then we pull up and she said, "Hey, I need $30." And I said, "What do you need $30 for? It's an open gym for your, public school, middle school volleyball. It's not club, it's not whatever." And she said, "No, that's what they put in the note, that everybody has to pay $30." And so this is the way in which I engage as an example of critical consciousness, was asking her. I said, "Well, talk to me about all the ways in which you gained access to this opportunity. And do you think there might be some students or people you haven't met yet, or perhaps friends, that are not getting access to this opportunity today?" And she sat with it for a little bit. She said, "Oh my gosh, I feel really bad. What should we do? Like, can you give me more money?" She's like, "Okay, mom, let's create more access and opportunity. How can we do this quickly?" Right. And so that's often what we do when we start to develop a critical consciousness, is that we say, "Okay, I want to act. I want to do something right away." Right. And so we had some continued conversations with that. And I wanted her more to sit with, build the awareness, to reflect, and then to think about what will we do about that in the future. So that's a quick example of that. This third piece, cultural competence, that many of you are probably familiar with this language, is really just about developing and maintaining cultural competence. So um, what's my own culture? What was the cultural background of the students that are in my learning environment, my learning community, in my classroom? How do I utilize that? And I always say that work starts with self. I think sometimes it's important for us to be conscious of, like, what's the information we require of families and students to give to us as they're walking in the building. And that may create a level of comfort, right? We ask them to fill out a ton of different forms, and they have to talk about their socioeconomic status. They have to talk about their often marital status, their title. Are they Mr., Mrs., are they Miss? All these kinds of things that can make people pretty vulnerable, right? And so they've already walked in and give us all kinds of information. Problem with that is that you all, as educators, right, we all, when we haven't necessarily seen all that. That's just the paperwork to get in the door. But so how do we first share about our own culture, create a safe environment to learn more about our families, of our students and our student culture, and then bring that into the learning environment? Another piece of that is encouraging the use of students' home language. I'm just going to throw lots of different things at you in terms of possible resources or ideas, and so hopefully you can take notes if it resonates with you. But things we've done in our district, for example, one is, you'll see me use in presentations, but use lots of different languages, just to acknowledge and make space for that. And then also to think about tools. We've been using different tools like Remind, or Talking Points. They're both apps that allow every teacher in a building to communicate with families, instead of asking for an interpreter for translation, et cetera. So they can be just those quick snippets. When then there's a bigger conversation or need, then you can call in bigger resources. But that has been a way that we've just set across our system. Hey, we need every teacher to have access to families, and to be able to do that in multiple languages. Another tool, if you haven't heard of it, might just be one of those things for the toolkit, is something called S'more, and it's a newsletter platform that we've switched to across our district, so that we can. It actually has like a translate button at the top, and so it's done that automatically, instead of people waiting on a translator to translate the classroom newsletter. It can happen just kind of with the push of the button. So those are some examples. But I think also putting things up in the classroom, using language when you can have multiple access to multiple languages, is useful. And then, of course, affirming family knowledge. And that comes up here around learning about the cultural background of your students and families, and then validating that, making space for that, honoring that, talking about that. My high school daughter, last year, I think it was a year ago, probably, I never got to read it because that's kind of how it goes, at least for me and with high schoolers. But she did tell me at one point, she asked me some questions and said that she was writing a piece about some of my personal background, which I thought it was fascinating, because she obviously listens to me at sometimes. And then she was using that in a classroom assignment to share with the teacher, and to walk through some of this piece around my experience. So it was beautiful in a lot of ways, and I still am like, oh, I wonder what that was. But I just try to say thank you, teacher, for validating my family knowledge in my child's education. This is another just graphic that can give a sense of, for me, a couple slides back was just mentioning what I think is important around this critical consciousness. Again, really, I'm sorry, I'm going backwards, focused in the work of Ladson Billings over several years. So the seminal article in 1995 and then all the way through 2014, she's been adding to, of course, her body of work. And this earlier I mentioned this, and so I'm just kind of using this language, and now I'm giving you the model and the visuals around this work around critical consciousness starts with self. And I think of it like on this continuum of steps, like building an awareness of one's own position and diversity, as well as that of others, but starting with self, building awareness, and then moving to reflection, um, and really starting to think about what's true for me, and then what does that mean in systems of oppression and privilege. And we'll walk through some examples. I'm going to give you some time to do this on your own as well, and then moving into action. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes people, they start to build an awareness, and then they move right here to step 3 and say, okay, I'm really um, like passionate about that thing that I just heard, and I want to do something about it. And what Ladson Billings talks about in her articles is that it's really important that we take the time to reflect and start navigating systems and asking questions around equity and social justice before we act, because we want to make sure that we're choosing the solutions that are most culturally responsive, and not just based on our own position and individual background. So that's where I think about heading into the conversation around equity. So this, the last one I was in there, number 1, awareness. Here, I just think about awareness of one's own position and diversity, as well as that of others. And again, I reiterate it multiple times because I really think that a lot of times when people talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice, they're thinking about the other. And that's a concept that we want to make sure that we're not engaging in, that our work starts with self. And so understand our own position and our own diversity is the starting point. And what I believe it does when we're more clear about who we are, how we show up in the world, is that it makes space for us to be more open to those experiences, ways of knowing, doing, what's right, wrong, that other people believe, their worldview and culture. So I'm going to share with you a couple of different examples, and then I'm going to give you a chance to do some reflection, because I know some of these educators that you're working with this week, and they would love you to just jump into the work. So um, I shared with you a little bit about where I was born, and I apologize. I'm trying to move the pictures, and I don't want to mess it up. Pictures where I was born here on the right hand, bottom hand side. I was not born in the United States, so considered non-native born. Um, and if you don't know, that's kind of a big deal in Colorado. So, for example, it's a big deal anywhere, but you'll see sometimes driving around Colorado, people have that sign that's like a Colorado, the mountains, and I think it says native on it or something. But I recently, well, it was about 2 years ago now because of the pandemic, but went to a singles group at my church. And that was the opening question when I walked in the doors, people asked was, are you, were you born here? And I'm like living in this place of like, I know what an anti-immigrant sentiment is. I've been living with that for the past 10 years and in the US more strongly over the last 4 to 5 years. And I was like, whoa, like that's quite the question. And then they followed it with, were you born in Colorado? And I was like, oh, okay, this is the Colorado native thing, right? So I was like, um, no, I was not. But that was the like opening question for this singles group. And it really, I think people don't realize sometimes, I think, what that experience can be for someone who, one, you're not born in Colorado. So then there was this controversy between, oh, you're from California. All the Californians want to come to Colorado. Those of you at CSU, that's a thing. Like people will talk about that all the time. Um, but also to have that double layer of being not born in the US, knowing where people lie with that, it was really kind of a scare for me to think about, am I safe in this place? Am I safe in this place, which I call my home in terms of my church? And what does this mean for me based on my religion and safety, belonging, and how does that show up, right? The second one around the circle to the left here, geographic location. So I wasn't born in the US. I was not born in Colorado, but I've grown up in Colorado. And so I've been kind of in this 50-mile radius, like all the rest of my life. And so that definitely, of course, then that's why there's a heart here around the Colorado symbol, right, from the flag. Um, I mentioned that have my PhD, my doctoral work. I did at CSU, and so proud to be an alum of CSU. This people often get confused about what does creed mean. Creed is like kind of your mantra, like what's the way in which you operate. And so I just add this little picture here. My creed is choose love, not fear. Something I've operated off of for many, many years. We all have a different creed. Sometimes somebody else gave it to us, and sometimes we've chosen that for ourselves. I mentioned as I started the middle areas of this diversity wheel or mosaic of diversity are based on, I refer to as the big six, the ways in which we're born in the world and the ways that we get the most um, feedback, I would say, about our actual or perceived identities that we can name and label. When I started, I mentioned that as a Latina, I'm sharing with you my gender as well as my ethnicity. Um, People often have questions about this one, which is functional specialty. I shared with you that I'm like an educator. That's my functional specialty. If I were to dig deeper, it's around educational equity. Um, but that's just a little bit because I want to share with you this concept of moving towards understanding our own diversity. And I already shared with you, but I put it in writing too, because I'm a super visual learner, as you can tell, is who am I and how do I show up in this world? And so when we talk about diversity, um, it's kind of this really basic term, but I think we're doing a lot of work in the system that I work in right now because people are really confused about the difference between diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice. They're using them synonymously, and then we're wondering why our results aren't changing because it's actually not the same thing. Diversity not the same as equity. And if we're not building equitable outcomes and goals for ourselves to meet those, and we just talk about diversity, we're not gonna change systems, right? So this is an opportunity. I just want to give you a couple of quiet moments. Um, and I think you're going to get to do some more work like this. And hopefully, this sets you up for success, like a little bit of a scaffold for some of the work you're going to do later this morning about yourself, who you are, how you show up in the world. But I just want to give you a quiet moment to take a couple notes if you have something to write with, or use your notes feature on your phone and name for yourself. How do you identify here in the middle? These big six, how do you identify there? And perhaps some of your identities around the outside, as I've shared with you many, many examples. You just didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, but here we are. Now you know. So I'm going to just be quiet for just 2 minutes and give you a chance to start to label, identify for yourself. How do I identify in these areas? I can see some of you still writing and some of you with pensive looks on your face. So I know you're still thinking. Um, so I appreciate your willingness just to start engaging in that reflection on who am I? How do I identify? And I know that through the week, you're going to do some more work about what does that mean in the way that I show up as an educator. So you could just kind of use that as a kind of like a hold button. How about that? So this next slide, I want to share with you why I started with that and the why around why I've introduced the way myself in the ways that I have and giving you the big context. Because those aspects of my diversity and the things that you just kind of noted for yourself on your wheel are really, in my mind, about my diversity creates my culture. People often have shared with me in my work as an educator for so many years that they don't think that people have culture unless they have like a diverse ethnicity or racial identity. And so I've really tried to help people understand that we all have culture, right? Your culture, our culture, is determined by all of those pieces on your diversity wheel and many more that aren't even noted there, right? So, culture refers to the dynamic system of social values, cognitive codes, behavioral standards, worldviews, beliefs used to give order and meaning to our own lives as the lives of others. So, if we think about that, it's the things that I have experienced, the ways that I've been perceived, what's true, what's not true, what's right, what's wrong, the ways that I code or call things appropriate or inappropriate, all of those things are my culture. And I've learned those as Peggy McIntosh talks about being a good student of the life lessons we've been taught and ingrained to believe, right? So most of us are just really good students. And we're kind of in that point of our lives and saying, is that true for us now? But knowing what those things are first is the starting point because um, as Geneva Gay has talked about early in her work around culturally responsive teaching, is that even without being consciously aware of it, culture determines how we think, believe, and behave. And these, in turn, affect how we teach and learn, right? So, all of those, the ways that we identify, the ways we experience the world, um, impact the way that we show up as an educator, right? And our ability to advocate for social justice in any of the content areas that we might end up teaching. So here's what I want to also acknowledge is that we have a we're in a point of history. Thank you for this. I see some of you smiling. We're in a point of history when I talk about this moment in time that there's a level of fear. And so there's a level of fear, almost like in the Wizard of Oz, of the lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my, right? People are saying diversity, equity, inclusion. Oh my, like there is not just the like superficial level of fear. There's also a real underground level of fear that people are, and we're seeing that exhibited in a lot of different ways, including the banning of critical race theory. At state levels, at least 5 states across the U.S. at this time. Um, so I say that because people are wrestling with what does this mean and what's my part in it, and what do I stand for? What do I believe in? What will I condone? Like all of these really, really difficult questions that are about my culture, right? And so with that, I invite, and I know you'll probably be creating other agreements for your time together, but I offer this is one of the ways that I have experienced ensuring that I can stay a part of courageous conversations, as Glenn Singleton out of Pacific Education Group guides folks through his work around courageous conversation for race, is about staying engaged. There will be moments in over the next 5 days where you might say, you know what, I'd really like to just turn my camera off. Or, you know what, I'd really like to just go ahead and leave, keep my camera on, but go for a swim and then head back here. Like there's going to be some tough moments in this work. And so I invite you to try to stay engaged and also experience the discomfort. And so as many of you know, in the book White Fragility, there really is some focus around understanding what happens when I get uncomfortable. Am I going to try to defend myself? Am I going to try to fight with the presenter? Am I going to do some kind of other strategy, like throw some kind of thing in the chat that will just sabotage like the direction of the group, or things like that. And so I always talk about noticing, where's my discomfort happening? Because discomfort for me, and based on my trauma background, I've learned to understand it shows up in feelings, and also emotionally, but also physically. So I can sense where stress shows up for me. If it happens in my across my temples, in the back of my head, what the headache coming on. Sometimes it's in your gut, in your stomach. But notice what that discomfort might be, and how you're engaging in that, and try to um, support yourself, as from, again, from the transformative SEL lens and social emotional learning lens. Is if there's a moment in which people feel shamed or blamed, that's, I think, our work as an individual, if we feel shamed or blamed, to think about our own self-awareness around, why is that happening, what is that rooted in, and how do I navigate that, not project that onto the messenger or the speaker, right? As I've mentioned earlier, speaking your truth to me is the most important, starting with self. I'm not a fan of people telling about stories of others unless they were active participant and engaging in that learning, because I think it helps, it creates a disconnection for us between ourself and sometimes people's diversity. And do we end up in that othering place again? I always think expecting and accepting non-closure, again, from Glenn Singleton, is critical. Um, Even in this conversation with me today, this keynote presentation is, I may have said some things that you're going to say, geez, I want to know more about that, or um, I don't ever want to think about that again, right? And so, and that's okay. But just know that things are going to come up for you, and be prepared for that. Perhaps it's not over. I say in this work around educational equity and social justice, it never ends. It's not a one-time task. It's not a one-time training. What you are going to have the opportunity to engage in for, over the whole week, is going to be a phenomenal experience. And you may not be done then either. And that's why, for me, as an educator for 25 years, this is still my life's work, as challenging and difficult as it is. I want to give you a chance, and we'll try this because, again, I've not done too much Zoom. I'm used to Google Meet, but I want to engage you in the opportunity to think about the next term. When we said diversity, equity, inclusion, oh my, what does inclusion mean to you? Because this particular little graphic I really, really love in terms of thinking about diversity across a lot of different areas. But what does inclusion mean? So I'm just going to be quiet for a minute, and give you the opportunity to, hopefully you can get into the chat. Is that true? Um, Dr. Vigil, I think
Yes,
I'm seeing a thumbs up. Okay.
people
So,
can go ahead and put their questions in there, or they can actually engage personally if they'd like.
so this one, yeah, finish the sentence. Inclusion is, finish that sentence if you would in the chat. And I might have to shift my presentation mode so I can see how that works. So this is great. Thank you. I've just found it. So it looks like inclusion, making sure everyone is included. Inclusion is voice, involvement, including perspectives, honoring, participation. Inclusion is being given the opportunity, invited, accepted, acknowledged, allowing perspectives, multiple perspectives, inviting everyone in, allowing space, ensuring people feel comfortable. Physical and emotional space. Thank you for participating in that. And I'll try to go back here to the presentation mode. This is one way that, let me move this, I think. one way that Dr. Floyd Cobb he's now at Colorado Department of Education, talks about access and belonging. So, and I think about this when I think about the term inclusion, because it's one thing to invite people into access, like to be a part of, like some of you are saying in your comments, like inviting people to be in. So we're creating access for people, like saying, okay, come to the table. Like I, as a woman of color, as an educator in public school district, as a student, preschool through my doc program at CSU, I was able to gain access, and I was almost always the only student of color in any educational setting that I was a part of for all those 27, 28 some years. So I had access, my sense of belonging. If I were to draw that, let me just do the little arrow dropping to the bottom for my sense of belonging, because as I mentioned, my professors would ask me, can you speak for as the voice of the Hispanic and Latino community? How does Hispanics feel about this topic? Whatever. I have a daughter who has been in the AP classes, IB program at her high school. And she said it's super tough because yes, she has access. We've done tons and tons of things to make sure she could access those courses. But she's the only student of color at her high school that was using a Native American mascot for many, many years, since 1925, until we just got that changed in the last year. They would have debates in the classroom about things like that. And she said it was a horrible, lonely place to be. Her sense of belonging was so low because she's the only person that had a differing opinion as a woman, as a student of color, as a woman of color, um, knowing my passion around it, my advocacy, my um, South American indigenous roots. So that's an example of what that looks like. So it's one thing to get us into the room, but please, please do everything in your power to ensure that our belonging is high as well. Right? It's an example of inclusion. A couple of things I wanted to share with you, and then we're getting close to kind of making space for some questions, is if you haven't seen this graphic yet, I really love this one. It's the one with the students the children looking over the fence for the baseball game has taken a lot of hits out on social media, if you don't know that, for a lot of different reasons. But this is a newer one that you can find on social media that is really resonating for me right now. It's a long comic strip. So the top two on the left are what would be at the top if we had four pictures and you could still read them. And then the two on the right go below that. So thinking about starting here, and I'm going to try to there we go. Here on the left, inequality is when there's unequal access to opportunities. So this is when we have seen like some students get access, for example, to AP classes, IB classes, magnet schools, right? Like gift and talent magnet school in Poudre School District. It's unequal access. That's inequality. Not everybody's going to get the fruits from that tree. Equality is when we evenly distributed tools and assistance, right? Meaning we gave everybody the same thing. Every kiddo who's going to go and pick apples gets the same size ladder. And here, this is what the question mark is around equality. Well, they're getting the same resource, but not gaining access, right? So we move over to the right of this particular model. This one around equity says that we then search and find custom tools that identify and address inequality. So here we've said to be more equitable, we're going to give students that need a different resource, that the resource that they need, we're going to level the playing field. And so this kiddo gets the taller ladder and can now reach the apple. The question around equity becomes, hey, wait, why did this child not have access for 400 and some plus years? Why did this this community, or in the US, it was illegal to have interracial marriage for so many years in the United States? Why? Like asking the critical conscious questions, using a questioning mentality, mindset around asking the questions around why. That's where the work moves us into this conversation around social justice, is and saying, asking the why. What were the root causes for that? And what are the barriers that may still be in place? My doctoral work at CSU was around navigating and acknowledging and making space for a lot of things. One, the racialized experience of Hispanic and Latino students in Northern Colorado. And secondly, what are the institutional barriers that may be about policies, they may be about practices. And here's the one that people really don't like. And that's people really don't like is that it's also about people. Like we can perpetuate, maintain, and sustain inequities and not allow for socially just learning environments if we are not willing to ask the tough questions and then remove the barriers. And so that's what this particular graphic says, that justice is about fixing the system to offer equal access to both tools and opportunities. It means acknowledging the barriers, removing the barriers, and changing the system. So this is one of the areas around equity that I have just kind of come to think about, is that it's if we're going to remove those barriers to access and opportunity, we do that with the goal and the outcome around equity of ensuring that the outcomes are no longer predictable by a student's protected class status or program participation. So protected class status can be things like race, ethnicity. I have a whole list of things, right? That's the one people think about the most, right? Program participation is one that people don't always consider, but that's like, is a student in English language development program? Are they gifted and talented? Are they in special education services? Are they receiving those program supports and services? So right now, what we know in Colorado, SchoolView is a great tool. If you don't know that one, from the Colorado Department of Education, something you can look up. And there's amazing data that they have made more readily available around what's true for our students based on protected class status and or program participation. Who's getting access and opportunity and who's not is the equity question. The last piece here that I really want to share around is just what I said earlier about understanding the socio-political context of teaching and learning. I shared this a year ago with educators because I was really trying to help build that knowledge and background around the counter story. What's true for people based on their protected class status, the areas that you saw earlier on that mosaic, what's in the middle of the circle, the big six, and why might some of our students and staff and families be showing up to us as educators with a low sense of belonging and with a sense of fear, with a wondering about whether or not their voice will be included, whether or not they should accept the opportunity to be invited to the table. And I think it's also important to go a deeper level, not just from national news, but to think about what's true in the community in which you end up serving and being an educator. These were pictures from the community in which I work in and live in the Loveland Berthoud area. Spray painted walls downtown, parked vehicles out in the community near Sam's Club with the anti-Asian sentiment. As many of you know, at CSU, the story that then later hit in Sports Illustrated about the Loveland man who was actually a CSU football player who was held at gunpoint because of perceived perception of somebody's participation in some Antifa. And so I say all of that because if we don't acknowledge the socio-political context of teaching and learning, we may be missing an opportunity to support our students. And so with that, this is kind of the offering I want to share with you as I get ready to field questions, and or I understand that you might send me questions, so either way is fine. But I just want to invite you to not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief, because there's a lot of people grieving. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it.